Nicole Kidman has made her first public appearance since her split from Keith Urban.
We've been through a lot together.
We've got a timeline for it now, and the time is now.
For nearly 20 years, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were seen as the perfect Hollywood, Nashville love story. An Oscar-winning actress and a country music star who overcame the odds. But behind the red carpets and duets, things were falling apart. Court documents now reveal Nicole filed for divorce after 19 years, with sources saying she fought to save the marriage. His initial post-split performance revealed no wedding band, no love ballad for Nicole, and changed lyrics which spoke of rewritten history. The golden couple picture has been broken, and Nicole's side is finally out. We get to know what made them so beloved and what ended one of Hollywood's greatest love stories. Nicole, the shy dreamer who became Hollywood royalty Nicole Mary Kidman, was born in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1967 to Australian parents who were abroad temporarily. Her father, Anthony Kidman, was a clinical psychologist as well as a biochemist, and her mother, Janelle, was a nurse as well as an educator. When she was still a child, the family moved back to Sydney, where she was brought up in a family filled with both discipline and ambition. In contrast to the confident, radiant woman she would eventually be, shyer than sin Nicole grew up. She blushed so vigorously when forced to speak in class that her teachers feared she was deficient in confidence. But that shyness went hand in hand with an incredibly strong imagination. She found her solace in acting, initially ballet, later drama classes, and then finally in youth theater troupes, where she could express the feelings she found difficult to verbalize in life. By her teenage years, her ability was undeniable. Australia's film industry then was starting to bloom, and she grabbed her opportunity, getting work in television films and eventually being cast in the 1983 cult thriller BMX Bandits. Her porcelain features and stature set her apart, but it was her dramatic range that made directors believe she was headed for greater things. By the late 1980s, Hollywood knocked. It was amidst this ascent that Nicole met Tom Cruise, her first great love and first great heartbreak. They married in 1990, becoming one of Hollywood's most photographed couples. For Nicole, the marriage was prestige and pain. Scientology, Tom's faith, overshadowed their marriage. Though she is sparing with details of those years, there is no doubt that when the marriage broke up in 2001, she lost not only a husband, but also primary custody of the two adopted children, Isabella and Connor. That hurt went deep. Friends went on to disclose that Nicole felt robbed of motherhood itself, pushed to the perimeter of her children's lives. For a woman who had coveted a family of her own, the break would be among the shaping traumas of her life. It is maybe no accident that when she subsequently encountered Keith Urban, she was obsessed with rebuilding the home and family dreams she had lost. Keith, the restless dreamer with a guitar Keith Lionel Urban, was born on the other side of the Tasman Sea in Whangarei, New Zealand, the same year as Nicole. His parents relocated to Queensland, Australia, while he was still young, and it was there that his temperament started to develop a restlessness and rebellious tinge that was ever in search of some kind of escape. His dad, Bob, ran a convenience store, but was also a fan of country music, which wasn't quite suburban Australia's most mainstream genre. He got his young Keith to learn the guitar, and by the time he was 6, he was gigging. Country music's stories of brokenness and redemption gave him identity and therapy, although while his natural talent was great, at home things were not so musical. At some point, supposedly, he grew up in a household torn apart by stress and fiscal uncertainty, something that might have driven him forever to seek stability. During his teenage years, he played talent shows in small pubs, honing not only his sound but his image too, the brooding country outcast with a rock star's bite. He quit school shortly afterward to play music professionally. Keith had no plan B. Music was his sole ticket to freedom, but with the talent came demons. By his 20s, he was already on alcohol and destructive substance. Fame, when it came, didn't stabilize him, it fueled more chaos. He relocated to Nashville in the early 1990s, starved for attention. And after years of hustling on the circuit, His big break finally arrived in 1999 with his self-titled American debut album. Keith was suddenly country music's new heartthrob, famous for his guitar playing, bedhead hair, and his voice that oozed with yearning. But away from the spotlight, the success was tinged with self-destruction. By the time he met Nicole in 2005, he had already been through rehab several times. He lived with the constant fear that his addictions would cost him everything he had struggled to achieve. Nicole and Keith, at first glance, seemed to hail from different planets, a case of Hollywood glamour against Nashville grit. What actually tied them together was the baggage they had. Nicole had the marks of a lost family and a marriage that conditioned her to distrust control and betrayal. Keith had the explosiveness of a man who had experienced obscurity and fame, but never quite overcame the need to destroy himself. When they finally met, both were at crossroads. Nicole had emerged from her divorce more powerful than ever, being awarded an Academy Award for The Hours and solidifying her status as one of the all-time great actresses. But she was emotionally raw, needing security after a decade of upheaval. Keith, however, was an up-and-coming star, forging out of his place in the hyper-competitive universe of American country music, but the accoutrements of fame, constant touring, temptation, and the strictures of an industry that values image as much as sound were driving him to the edge. He required someone who could ground him, someone who could encourage him to believe in something other than the glow of the stage lights. In hindsight, it is impossible to avoid seeing the portent. Her need for control and stability was inevitably going to conflict with Keith's restless, addictive nature. Their marriage held the potential for healing. Maybe she could reconstruct the family she'd lost, and he could redeem himself through her stability, but it also held the potential for future conflict. For Nicole, being with another celebrity posed risks of its own. Her marriage to Tom Cruise had shown her how harsh the public eye could be. But with Keith, she could see vulnerability, even breakability, and it awakened her protective nature. For him, she was both muse and mirror, a person whose control and achievement answered his own unpredictability, but whose love held out the possibility of allowing him to be the man he had always aspired to be. Their formative years had sculpted them into multifaceted, skilled-at-pain individuals. When finally, in 2005, they came crashing together, it seemed as though fate had brought them together, but in reality, it was more like combustible chemistry. Crossing paths and fairy tale romance, when Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban finally met in 2005, it was heralded as a romance out of Hollywood fiction. Two Australians, both international icons, both of the same age, both toughened by their own previous hardships, bumping into one another at the very moment that their lives were about to be reborn. The glamour magazines and red carpet picnics had described their encounter as destiny, but undercurrent. It was far from destiny and much more an attempt by two damaged individuals to hold on a hope of redemption. The initial spark was lit at the Day USA Gala in Los Angeles during January 2005, the Australians in Hollywood bash. Nicole was still reeling from the whirlwind of her split with Tom Cruise, but by then had bounced back with her career and was a towering figure as an Oscar-winning actress. Keith, however, was the up-and-coming Nashville artist whose albums were beginning to spill over into mainstream pop popularity. When she first met him, she admitted later that she did not think he was interested. He was nice, but not demonstrative, and although they traded numbers, he did not call her for months. She revealed years later that his early absence of advances almost ended the romance before it started, but once he made overtures, something snapped. Their affair progressed rapidly once underway. They were pictured together by May, and towards the close of the year, she was talking about him in interviews as being the man who had swept her off her feet. For her, who had grown up under the authoritarian surveillance of her marriage to Tom, he symbolized freedom. He was fiery, rough, and unfinished in all the ways that Tom Cruise wasn't. For Keith, she symbolized legitimacy, sophistication, and a sort of stabilizing influence he had never known. By November, he was accompanying Nicole down red carpets, not as her escort, but as her beau. Their chemistry was palpable, and the media fell in love with the couple. Australia's golden children had met their match in America. In June 2006, a year and 1 month after they started dating, they tied the knot in an extravagant wedding ceremony at the Cardinal Soretti Memorial Chapel on Sydney's Manly Peninsula. She was dressed in a Balenciaga wedding gown with a sweeping veil, while he, sporting his signature flowing hair, resembled a romantic troubadour. The guest list was filled with Hollywood royalty and country music stars, but the focus was the closeness of the affair. She was said to have entered the church in candlelight, fighting back tears, while he sang to her at the reception. For her fans, it was the fairy tale perfect ending to both of their dark histories. Nicole, the woman who had survived the controlling hold of her former love, had discovered a man who seemed to love her without condition. Keith, on the other hand, had redeemed himself in the arms of one of the world's greatest actresses. Sadly, not like fairy tales, things were not as perfect in real life. The first cracks only 4 months into the marriage. Keith admitted himself to rehab for alcohol addiction. It was a shattering shock to their honeymoon euphoria. Nicole had hardly gotten through penning her thank you notes when she was confronted with a crisis. The tabloids jumped on the bandwagon, implying she had what time bomb. For him, the setback was embarrassing. He had promised that she would be enough to stabilize him, but old patterns quickly took over again. Nicole, always guarding her personal life, opted for loyalty over humiliation. She stood by him, going to visit him at rehab and not giving the media the pleasure of witnessing her cracking under the pressure. In subsequent interviews, he thanked her for saving his life at the time, but insiders observed something more multifaceted. She had been deprived of the opportunity to salvage her marriage to Tom, so now she was flinging herself into the role of healer and caretaker with Keith. She was a believer in second chances and, in him, that allegiance would frame much of their marriage for better and for worse. In spite of the rough beginning, the couple spent the next few years working on their reputation as one of Hollywood's few lasting romances. She continued to star in big films, alternating between blockbusters such as Australia and serious acting turns in films like Rabbit Hole. In the meantime, he cemented himself as a superstar of country music, touring incessantly and receiving awards, among them several Grammys.